Welcome. My name is Corey Joseph, and I'm a substance abuse prevention specialist for the Lewis Pyramid.
Hello, my name is Catrice Marshall, and I am the Substance Abuse Prevention Specialist for the South County Pyramid.
Building self-healing communities, ACE interface. Understanding NEAR, neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, resilience. I'm going to share with you findings from the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. We'll call it the ACE study. The ACE study confirms with scientific evidence that adversity early in life increases physical, mental, and behavioral problems later in life. The ACE study is the largest study of its kind, with over 17,000 participants. It was developed and co-sponsored by Kaiser Permanente of San Diego, California, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia in the early 90s. Dr. Vincent Felitti and Dr. Rob Anda are the co-principal investigators of the ACE study. Dr. Anda, who designed the ACE study while he was working as a senior scientist at the CDC, reviewed and approved all the information from the study that I'll report to you today. The human nervous system. Before I introduce the ACE study, I want to explain a little bit about brain development. The human central nervous system connects us to ourselves, to other people, and to the world around us. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord that integrate all of our senses and information from receptors located throughout the human body. It regulates internal body functions and manages elaborate chemical and electrical signaling. The nervous system considers sensory input in the context of each and every second, almost instantaneously, and determines our understanding of and responses to the world we live in. Cells in the nervous system are called neurons. They're stunningly effective at processing and transmitting information, and they have a central purpose in doing so, to adapt in ways that keep us alive. Dr. Martin Tetchler of Harvard University reviewed and approved all the brain science facts in this presentation. Synaptic density. The last section of the slide represents age 14, about the time of puberty. Notice that there are now fewer connections between the brain cells than there were at age 6. This is because the least experienced connections tend to withdraw at about the time of puberty. This process is called pruning. The phenomenon helps to explain why neglect or not getting experiences we need can have such a powerful negative impact on health and social functioning. Every person's life is unique, but for illustration, let's imagine two worlds. One is mean and dangerous. The second is kind and generous. Traumatic experience during development, like abuse, neglect, and chaotic relationships, generates predictable patterns of the brain architecture, behavior, and traits. Humans are only really made to be under stress for about 20 minutes at a time, long enough to prepare for fight or hide. So experiences that cause stress chemicals to be continuously produced, for example, child abuse, neglect, or even being in a war zone, have a big impact on development. Under these circumstances, our bodies tend to prepare for life in a dangerous world. Stress hormones exert influence on cells, chemicals, and wiring. They sculpt brains that are wired for certain characteristics like being edgy, hot-tempered, impulsive, hypervigilant, or being withdrawn, disassociated, or numb. This is a path outlined on the top line of the slide. For example, people who've had traumatic stress from conception to toddler years will likely have a higher baseline of the stress hormones like cortisol in their bodies. As a result, these folks may have a short fuse, be self-focused, and may have a difficult time shifting gears from emotion to problem solving. If there's more danger just around the corner, being focused on others and thinking through options wouldn't contribute to survival. Readiness for a next danger world would. But the downside of is that when stress hormones like cortisol hang around for a long time, they are toxic to brain cells. The toxicity includes making it difficult for brain cells to develop healthy neural networks and can even cause brain cells to die. That is why we call continuous stress, trauma, and episodic, unpredictable stress toxic stress. Dr. Techer calls the lower path in the diagram the benevolent world path. The world is kind, easygoing, helpful, and free from traumatic stress. People growing up on this path are more likely to develop a brain with cells and wiring and chemistry for being focused, flexible, and relationship oriented. What kind of situations might be a good match for a person who tends to be edgy, hypervigilant, emotionally detached, or quick to act? How might these kinds of adaptations be useful in this environment? One common belief in our society is that people whose experiences take them on the top path are maladaptive, and the people along the bottom path are adaptive. That's untrue. Both pathways are adaptive, both brains are adapting to their experiences. And that's good for us as a species. The people whose brains adapt to a dangerous or stressful world are more likely to survive when life is tough. The people whose brains adapt to a safe world are likely to be prepared to meet society's expectations in tranquil times. Our experiences get wired into our biology. Likewise, Dr. Techer says it's when our biology collides with social expectations that we run into trouble. If you put a person from the benevolent world into the chaotic and turbulent environment of, say, riot control, that person may struggle unless he has learned some very specific skills. Likewise, a child adapted to a dangerous, stressful world may not sustain patience. He or she may not share, cooperate, or use words as a first choice. When that child comes to school and we ask her to sit still, share, cooperate, there can be a painful disconnect that is hard for everyone. The child will have to be actively taught the skills required to succeed in this context, just as we would train a person from the benevolent path how to act in a chaotic and dangerous environment. Let's take a closer look at one of the factors that determines the effects of maltreatment: age. Why would the age of a person at the time of maltreatment have a powerful effect? The brain develops in a sequence from primitive to most advanced. Think about it. A tiny baby does not need to be able to write a paper or pass a math test, but she does need to breathe, eat, regulate body temperature, sleep, and connect with someone who will nurture and protect her. So the parts of the brain that control internal body functioning and ability to connect to a primary caregiver develop earliest. Brain regions that control complex thought processes like abstract writing and math aren't fully developed until later in childhood. And so continues a magnificent dance of experience and adaptation, generating age appropriate capacities for feeling, thinking, and responding to the world around us. As the brain develops, there are sensitive periods for each brain region when the size and functional abilities of the region are most affected by experience and are most vulnerable to toxic stress. New abilities build on the growth and development from earlier months and years. Over time, elaborate systems of specialized brain regions develop that help us to navigate increasingly complex environments. Stress. Toxic stress in early childhood has profound effects on brain structures and functions and develop later in childhood. These functions include the mediation of emotional responses, social interaction, and abstract thinking. That's why people say that early childhood is so important, and they're right. But early childhood isn't the only sensitive developmental period, according to the latest research. The brain research that has been introduced although accurate, is simplified and limited in scope. Each brain region has sensitive periods when experience has powerful effects on brain mass and functioning. For example, during middle childhood, around ages 7 to 13, emotional and verbal abuses can affect the centers for processing sound, developing verbal language, and perceiving social cues. Effects can be different for boys than for girls. For example, both neglect and sexual abuse affect boys and girls, but neglect in infancy and through the toddler years for boys has a large effect on cross-brain communication, while cross-brain communication is profoundly affected in girls through sexual abuse of girls around ages 7 to 10. By the time we reach our mid to late 20s, our central nervous system with the brain, as it as its command center orchestrates everything from our automatic body functions like breathing and heartbeat to complex goal-oriented behavior and abstract analytical thinking. The elaborate signaling system in our brain is well practiced. In a fraction of a second, it determines whether sensory information from sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell should come into the brain and be processed, or whether the information must be filtered out in a favor of survival. Stress may be interpreted by the brain as something we can tolerate and work through, or as something that is overwhelming. Our set points for that interpretation are largely in place by early adulthood. We've talked about sensitive development periods when toxic stress has profound effects on human development, but these childhood times are also windows of opportunity for building resilience. After all, the developing brain is sensitive to all kinds of experience. By paying attention to sensitive developmental periods, we can do a better job protecting children and providing the kinds of challenges and supports that may remediate earlier periods of toxic stress and promote lifelong health and well-being. We have a collective choice. We can actively develop skills and accommodations that enable everyone to contribute to community, or we can continue our societal pattern of rejecting people when they have normal adaptive responses to childhood adversity. If you remember only one thing from the information about brain development, I hope it will be that toxic stress can be hardwired into the biology. Before we assume that a person's behaviors are a rebellious choice, let's think about the possibility that adversity may be the heart of the challenge we see. We've been talking about the effects of toxic stress on individuals. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about the effects of toxic stress on the population as a whole. The field of epidemiology is where we'll turn. Epidemiologists are scientists who study the origins of disease, disability, productivity, and health in population. They help us to focus our efforts on issues and processes that will make the most difference for the well-being of everyone. We're going to talk about a large epidemiologic study about the enduring effects of adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Rob Anda and Dr. Vincent Valetti are the co-principal investigators of the study, which they call the ACE study. Most prior studies of the health and social effects of childhood abuse focused on a single type of adversity, such as sexual abuse. The ACE study broadened the picture to include multiple types of childhood stressors. In addition, the study measured a wide array of health and social problems. This is how the ACE study expanded the knowledge into a broader public health perspective. So the ACE study is unique because it provides the potential to understand how multiple forms of childhood stressors can affect many important public health problems. Design the ACE study began in 1991. In 1994, the CDC provided funding to conduct the ACE study at the Department of Preventative Medicine in San Diego. More than 17,000 adult members of the Kaiser Health Insurance Plan completed a survey about adverse childhood experiences. Health behaviors, disease risk and disease, mental health and substance abuse, and other health and social problems. Their ages range from 19 to 94 years. Study participants were generally well educated. Most had attended college, and only 6% did not have a high school diploma. They were predominantly white, middle class people who had access to some of the best healthcare in the world. Study participants are still being followed to access the relationship of ACEs to causes of death, incidence of disease, health care utilization, and use of prescription medications. Adverse childhood experiences are common. The slide shows the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences that were studied. The first group are indicators of household dysfunction, which include growing up with substance abusing household members, alcohol or drugs, parental separation or divorce, growing up with mentally ill household members or caregivers, witnessing intimate partner violence, specifically having a battered mother, or criminal behavior as evidenced by having a household member imprisoned. 3 forms of childhood abuse were studied: emotional, physical, and sexual, and 2 forms of neglect were included: emotional and physical. As you can see from the percentages on the slide, ACEs are common in the middle class, well-educated population. Because adverse childhood experiences are so highly interrelated, it did not make sense to look at how single categories of ACEs influenced health and social problems. Instead, Dr. Anda and Folletti developed an ACE score. The score is simply a count of the number of categories of ACEs that each person reported from 0 to 10. Each category counts as 1, and the points in the ACE score. So if a person experienced physical abuse, no matter how many times or what the severity of the abuse, the ACE score is 1. If the person experienced physical abuse and had a substance abusing parent, the ACE score is 2, and so forth. Think of the ACE score as a measure of the childhood biological stress dose. As the ACE score goes up, on average, the exposure to the developmental effects of the toxic stress increases. In this illustration, you see that only a third of people in the study had an ACE score of 0. 16% had a scores of 4 or more. Adverse childhood experiences are common, and they tend to cluster. ACEs are hidden burden in the study population. People who report higher scores are more likely to have health and social problems. In fact, as the ACE score goes up, the percentage of people with health and social problems also goes up. We call this a dose-response relationship. You know dose-response: the more gas you put into your car, the more miles you can drive. In this case, where there is a higher dose of adverse childhood experiences, the higher percent of people with health problems. All of the data slides from the ACE study that'll show you today are formatted in this same way. Along the bottom horizontal axis are the ACE scores, from 0 on the left to 4 or more on the right. The vertical axis is the percent of people who have the disease or condition. So in the first set of bars on the far left, we see that the percent of people who became regular cigarette smokers by the age 12 goes up as each level of the ACE score goes up. In this second set of bars, we see the percent who were smokers as adults also goes up in a stepwise fashion as the score goes from 0 to 4 or more. People with higher ACE scores have increased risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. About 4% of people with an ACE score of 0 developed COPD, while more than double that percent of people, about 9% with an ACE score of 4 or more, developed COPD. ACE leads to early onset of smoking, which is sustained throughout adulthood and eventually leads to a high risk of smoking-related lung disease. ACEs can result in depression and anxiety. Nicotine can reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. So, the benefits of nicotine in reducing these unpleasant emotions might help to explain why knowledge of health risks due to smoking are not enough for some people to quit.
We can anticipate why ACEs are related to certain behaviors, negative consequences, and social conditions. In this slide, we see the risk of being an adult who abuses alcohol increases six-fold from an ACE score of 0 to a score of 6. And ACEs can affect relationships. People with higher ACE scores are more likely to marry someone who abuses alcohol. Think for a minute how alcohol abuse can be transmitted from one generation to another. ACEs and depression. Depression is the leading cause of disability in developed countries. Here we see that the risk of depression increases for both men and women in a dose response relationship as the ACE score goes up. That's because, as we talked about in the beginning of the presentation, ACEs are stored in our bodies. They are in the memories of our cells. They can lead to mental, physical, and even behavioral health problems later in life. Examples of ACE problems. Here's a list of some of the health and social problems documented by ACE study publications. Because ACEs have a powerful impact on many health and social problems, the ACE researchers concluded that ACEs are the leading cause of health and social problems in our nation, and this should lead to thinking about prevention. ACEs are common. ACEs are highly interrelated, and ACEs have a cumulative impact that is captured by the ACE score. And people with higher ACE scores are more likely to have multiple health and social problems, which can increase the odds of their children having high ACE scores. The discoveries about the effects of toxic stress on the developing brain produces biologic plausibility for the ACE study findings. So, we can conclude that the relationship between the ACE score and health problems is a cause and effect relationship. Take a look at this slide, population risk. So, how do we put everything that we've learned together to make a case for understanding ACEs as a powerful pathway for health, healing, and well-being? Well, in this public health diagram, we see that they use oil spills to show the risk to certain factors. This is the oil slick diagram. It looks at ACEs and shows the percentage of various health and social problems that epidemiologists estimate are caused by ACEs. This is displayed as percentages as an oil spill on the slide. So we can see from the slide that the percentage of the oil coated represents the percentage of each problem that is potentially preventable by preventing ACEs. The percentages are quite large. In fact, the high percentages on this chart are rarely seen in public health studies. Now, we understand that ACEs are common and have a strong cumulative impact on the risk of common health and social problems. Preventing ACEs and their intergenerational transmission is the greatest opportunity that we have to improve the well-being of human populations. The effects of ACEs reflect a powerful opportunity for prevention, no matter if you're working to prevent heart disease or cancer, end homelessness or hopelessness, or improve business profitability as we align a portion of our work around a common goal of preventing the accumulation of ACEs and moderating their effects. We will reduce all of these problems and many others all at once. There are four resilience factors that help as they are layered up. They are hope, along with social and emotional support, having two or more people to seek for advice, who can serve as your mentor and provide help that we all need in life, stronger communities that are reciprocal in their efforts to work together. I always hear stories about how neighbors back in the day watched out for each other and their children. If a child was in trouble at school, each person they met along the way at home had heard and would make sure that they knew. Communities helped raise money to help families in trouble of losing their homes and just did favors for one another. In the world today, we call social bridging a hookup. If someone you know has a need and you know someone or a resource that can help you provide that introduction or give directions. In career counseling, we always talk about the hidden job market, and it's really networking. More people find their next position based on social interactions than job boards or any other source. When people hear about the ACE study findings, they often ask about the development of resilience. The notion of resilience reminds us that our supportive efforts make a difference and truly matter. Positive adaptation is guided by the interaction of three systems, as shown on this slide. The systems include individual capabilities, the formation of attachment, and a community of competent people with faith and cultural practices that produce the sense of belonging. Within this type of environment, personal attributes of resiliency are birthed like a positive view of one's life and self regulation. The core protective symptoms remind me of what is poured into me when we observe Kwanzaa each year. It's like taking 7 days to pause, have fellowship, and reflect on the ancestors in our family and culture and their positive impacts on our lives while having conversations about the seven principles and discussing how to build and edify our community and families. One of the things we say at the end of each night is Harambe, which in Key Swahili means let's pull together. Relationships with caring and competent people are vital contributors to resilience and recovery, but individual competency is just about an important factor in the development of resiliency. Learning new skills, practicing safety is important in our survival in this dangerous and sometimes unpredictable world. People with developmental trauma or who find it difficult to pick up on social cues, regulate their emotions, and who struggle with addictions or family bonds can be challenging friends and neighbors. I'm sure we can all picture at least one person who fits these characteristics. Strong relationships will become the norm once we learn to improve our skills and increase our competence to be helpful to one another when we celebrate, rest, or during times of stress and through challenges. To dramatically improve health and safety for this and future generations, the key is fostering thriving communities. Building community capacity is about helping people learn, manage, and improve their efforts systematically, providing flexible funding, state of the art education, and directing support to mobilize public and private partners who want to help. To learn more about capacity building, we look to communities that have changed the way people work together to solve problems and have had stunning success. Success doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey that intentionally builds new capacities and supports healing and prevention. Each successful community is unique and has traveled to that journey differently. Communities that have reduced major social problems and the percent of young people with high ACE scores have used similar methods to achieve those results. In Washington state, a system of community public health and safety networks call these communities high capacity communities. The process that they have used since 1994 is called General Community Capacity Development. It's when the public health uses an approach to solve interrelated problems by improving people's connections, their shared responsibility, and the collective impact of their efforts. Community capacity development puts into place a four-phrased iterative process to nurture development of healthy and productive adults, regardless of the circumstances into which they are born. This approach increases the collective impact of services and neighborhood initiatives by aligning efforts around common purposes. The four phases in the process are leadership expansion, coming together around issues of importance to the community, learning together, and results based decision making. The process is powerful because success in one phase propels success in the next. It generates a virtuous cycle with the power to improve population health and uses all the resources in a community, including its people power. Supporting healthy community methods that respect cultural traditions and values is a high leverage activity. Just as a rising tide lifts all boats, a high capacity community lifts all beings. People living in high capacity communities are less likely to have high adverse childhood experience scores. There is a decrease of drug and alcohol abuse, lower levels of depression, and other serious and persistent mental illnesses, and fewer problems in school and at work. Change is up to us. It is shaped by our thoughts, our conversations, the way we relate to one another in relationships, in families, and in communities. We would like to thank you for joining us today around this very important topic.